Hello, thanks for watching. Subscribe down below if you're enjoying. And today I'm going to take you through sculpting fur onto models in a couple of different ways. I'm using Primaris Space Marines here, but obviously you could use this on any miniature you fancy. Now, first step is curing the green stuff, so I've mixed this about 35-40 minutes before I've started using it, and that really helps in the sculpting technique and it loses a lot of its stickiness. What I'm also doing, as I've done before in my videos which showed sculpting, is I prep my table with a bit of parchment paper stuck to it, a bit of Vaseline on that parchment paper and on my fingers, and it really just makes the green stuff easy to use, less prone to sticking to your fingers and your devices. It also means you put parchment paper down, it won't pick up the texture from the table. So step one, as you've seen, I've taken a piece of the green stuff, shaped it to broadly the shape that I'm wanting onto the Space Marine, a couple of mil thick, and then put it down a table. And what I'm doing here is just with a old file, Vaseline the end, and I'm stabbing a line of holes going to 3/4 of the way through the green stuff all around the piece that I'm using. Now what that does, you'll see later on, is it helps it to fold into itself and into the model kind of as we're working. It's something I've done for years and years after being shown it with working with green stuff, so don't know if it's true or not, but I work it, I like it. It also helps build up some of the texture. Now this is a different model I'm working on because the video failed on the first one. I didn't realise, but I've recorded a couple. So again, I've shaped this one just to go down its side as more like a slightly different shaped piece, but the technique's the same. So what I'm doing now is going around the very edge and teasing out the green stuff from sort of about the first hole that I've put in to the edge, to really break up and make that line look a bit more natural, like the ends of the fur ragging out. Now while the green stuff is on the table here, what we're not trying to do is we're not trying to put every last piece of texture in, we're just kind of starting the texture, and you'll see why there's no point doing tons and tons of texture in a second when we put it on the model. So kind of starting from maybe a middle or two into the green stuff and pulling it out towards the edge, just to put some lines and some texture starting in there. So starting from the edge, working towards the middle, and then starting from the opposite side we've just worked on, just to try and make the lines look a little bit natural and make it look like the hair on the fur is kind of flowing as it would do semi in reality. And what I'm using here is just a sculpting tool. I think this one's from the Army Painter range. I think I've showed a Games Workshop one from I've had for years before, but whatever you want to use is fine. And you'll see later on we do actually go to using a scalpel to do it. So really anything with a fairly thin flat edge. Now if you start with a sculpting tool like this, the sculpting tool itself is a mil or two thick. It will give you certain hair depth, and then you can go on to a smaller one later or a larger one just to give various depths and detail. So you can see there, the holes are still very, very visible. We've not covered them up with the fur technique, and you'll see why in a second. So what we're doing now is basically piecing this and placing it onto the model. Now it's far, far bigger than we want to cover on the model, but now what we're going to do is push it into the model itself and make it look like we've draped a piece of fur over ourselves, because it wouldn't just sit into one flat panel. And this is where having the holes across the model help, because it helps the green stuff to fold easier onto the model itself. And this is where having a bit of detail on there is good, because that detail will fold in amongst itself and just, you know, give quite a nice effect. But again, this is why you don't want to spend hour upon hour putting loads of detail onto it before you place it on the model, because you are going to lose some of it now. So really now, the placement of it is whatever you fancy. I always like to try and avoid covering, you know, the exhaust vents if you're doing it on a Space Marine or something like that, because you wouldn't want them covered in real life, because your fur would set on fire. And I just try and make it look a bit more movement, if that makes sense. So try and have it as it would actually land if this was a real person kind of running about. So I do try to not cover, you know, elbow joints and neck joints and that kind of thing, because you wouldn't have this thing on you to prevent your movement. But not you go nuts, do it as you like. So really keep playing, prod it into the crevices and cracks until you're quite happy where it sits. And then what you see here I'm just doing is starting to put a little bit more texture onto there in the flow of the model. So really just putting those lines in to represent those the kind of hair lines and fur lines in and around all different areas of the model, and really just playing until I'm kind of happy with what they're doing. The other thing I'm doing relatively often is kind of pushing down the edges so that they're kind of contacting the model itself and pushing them kind of into themselves, so that you know, it's going to stay secure. So you know, you're not putting any glue onto this green stuff. The actual pressure of the green stuff itself is what is going to glue it down to the model. So you need to make sure that around the edges it is actually stuck to the model, because it will in places sort of lift, and you want to try and get it to contact right around. You can have small gaps and things that you can see under, but if it's gaps all the way around, there is a risk that it's going to come off the model at a later point. So as you go around, put the texture in, you know, stab, prod, put lines across, go nuts, do what you think looks good. This is not a real creature you're sculpting. You know, this for me, and the background of this army in particular, because it's a Dark Angel successor army, this is, you know, a Calibanite lion, you know, a chaos beast that they've killed and done that. So who knows what a chaos beast looks like? No one. So really, how you want to make the fur look is entirely up to yourself. Now what I've done here is I've moved on from the sculpting tool and just gone around exactly the same process with a scalpel, and really gone to some of the lines I've already put down and kind of cut them in half with a scalpel blade, because it's thinner and it makes the hair slightly more detailed than we've already done. So we'll show some finished shots at the end of that model, and now what I'm doing is moving on to the captain model, who's already wearing a cloak. So because he's already wearing a cloak, we don't want to use the same technique we've just used on a normal Primaris Marine, because if you did, you're using 2 or 3 mil of green stuff to make the fur. Stick that on top of the fact that he's already got a robe that's already on top of his armour. You end up with, for me, very, very bulky looking fur, and that's not the effect I wanted. The other thing is, what I'm trying to do here is take a robe he's already got and almost make the impression that it's that kind of fur trimmed robe that you see, where, you know, the top part of the robe is fur and then it goes into the normal cloth of the rest of the model. So we don't want as thick a layer of green stuff. So you can see here I've taken just maybe a small bit, and I've spread it so there's maybe a millimetre of green stuff onto the model here, and I've just put it onto an area I'm going to work on at the moment to see what it looks like. And you can see quite directly here what I'm doing. I've put it onto his shoulder, pressed it down, and now I'm working in rows, starting from the bottom, working the way up, and literally putting these straight lines onto the model. Now this is a little bit later, so I've gone around and I've put the straight lines on. I've put some more green stuff on and blended that in and worked around underneath his backpack. And now I'm doing the same thing and going round with the scalpel blade again and thinning out those lines, and that's as simple as it needs to be. So this is not a particularly difficult technique. It's not a hard thing to do. It's quite quick, quite easy, quite nice. I think I did 6 models from this squad, maybe in an hour and a half. So it's not something you need to rush at. You can take your time, but also it's not something you need to set hours and hours of your life aside to complete. So here's the finished article. This is the captain, obviously all painted up in my Dark Angel successor, and here's the heavy bolter that we saw worked on. So a nice, quick, simple effect. I hope you enjoyed it. If you had, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.